Look at this old brass compass. To my son, Nathan, this compass meant I was a broke, sentimental fool, clinging to junk from a job that never made me any real money. That's why his wife slid a thick manila envelope across the table at his engagement dinner, looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "There's $15,000 in there," she said, loud enough for the whole private room to hear. "Consider it a generous parting gift, Frank. Take it and stay home next time." Nathan didn't even look up from his phone. He just smirked and told the table that his old man used to be a mall security guard and never quite got over losing the uniform. He thought he was untouchable because in 3 weeks he was going to be named the youngest chief operating officer in the history of Callahan Freight and Logistics. What he didn't know was that I had built that company from a single rusted-out delivery truck in 1987, and in exactly 2 minutes, I was going to remind him exactly whose name was on the deed to his entire future. To understand how we got to that table, you have to understand who I am, and more importantly, who I chose to be for the last 22 years. My name is Frank Delacroix, and I'm 63 years old. Every single morning, without fail, I wake up at 5:30 in a small rented duplex on the edge of town, put on the same navy work jacket I've worn since before my son could tie his own shoes, and walk 2 blocks to the same diner where I drink the same cup of burnt coffee and read the same folded-up newspaper. If you passed me on the street, you'd think I was a retired security guard just getting by on a modest pension, maybe picking up part-time shifts to cover the electric bill. And for 22 years, that's exactly what I wanted everyone, including my own son, to believe. Here's the thing nobody in my family knows. When my wife Carol died of a sudden heart attack at just 41 years old, I didn't just lose the love of my life. I lost my reason for wanting any of it: the money, the company, the name on the building downtown. Grief does strange things to a man. It made me want to disappear. So I did something most people would call insane. I stepped down from public leadership of Callahan Freight and Logistics, installed a trusted, silent chairman named Walter Higgins to run the visible side of the business, and I quietly retreated into the shadows as the sole owner. Nobody outside of a locked filing cabinet and a very tight-lipped attorney knew that Frank Delacroix, the sad old man in the navy jacket, held 100% of the voting shares in a logistics empire worth just over $2.1 billion. I did it for one reason, and one reason only: my son, Nathan. He was 14 when his mother passed, and I watched money change people around us almost instantly. Distant cousins who'd never called suddenly wanted to take him fishing. A guidance counselor at his school started mentioning college funds a little too eagerly. I decided right then that Nathan would never know real wealth existed in our family until he'd already become the man he was going to become, for better or worse. I wanted to see who he was when he thought there was nothing to inherit. If any of you watching have ever hidden a part of yourselves just to find out who really loves you, drop a comment right now and tell me what state or country you're tuning in from tonight. I read every single one, and it amazes me how far these stories travel. For the first few years after college, Nathan seemed like he was going to be all right. He took an entry-level dispatch coordinator job at Callahan Freight, completely unaware that his own father secretly signed off on every executive decision from behind the curtain. He worked long hours. He seemed humble. Using my quiet influence through Walter and the board, I nudged a few promotions his way when he genuinely earned them, watching proudly as my boy climbed from dispatch to regional manager to senior operations director in under 6 years. I told myself I was building a good life for him without him ever needing to know where the ladder came from. But something shifted the day Walter called to tell me the board had unanimously approved Nathan for Chief Operating Officer. It wasn't the promotion itself that worried me. It was how fast the ink dried on his new titanium business cards, and how fast his humility seemed to evaporate right along with it. Almost overnight, Nathan leased a glass-walled penthouse downtown. He traded his practical sedan for a matte black Range Rover with dealer plates still on it. And worst of all, he started looking at me the way you'd look at a stain on an otherwise clean shirt. It started small. At Sunday dinners, which used to be sacred to us, he'd make little comments about my duplex, my old truck, my worn-out jacket. He'd sigh dramatically when I ordered the cheapest thing on a restaurant menu. He'd say things like, "Some men just never had the ambition to want more," right in front of his fiancée, Vanessa, and her parents. Like, I wasn't even sitting there. I held my tongue every single time. I told myself he was young, stressed, adjusting to new pressure. I told myself grief had made him hard in ways I hadn't noticed because I'd been too busy hiding my own. How long was I willing to let him keep going before I finally stepped in? The real cruelty, though, didn't come from Nathan directly at first. It came from Vanessa's family, and Nathan let it happen without ever once defending me. Vanessa Whitfield came from what her mother, Delphine, liked to call old railroad money, the kind of family that measured a person's worth by the cut of their suit and the university crest on their ring. The moment Vanessa found out Nathan was about to become COO of a $2 billion logistics company, her family's interest in the wedding suddenly caught fire. Delphine started showing up to family gatherings in mink-trimmed coats, dropping phrases like generational wealth and appropriate optics, and looking at my navy work jacket like it was contagious. The turning point came at a dinner Nathan practically begged me to attend, held at a private club neither of us had ever set foot in before that night. Vanessa's father, a stiff, silver-haired man named Reginald Whitfield, arrived in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The second he sat down across from me, he studied my jacket with a look of pure disgust. "Frank," he said, loud enough that 3 neighboring tables turned their heads, "I'll have my assistant send over a gift card to a proper men's shop." As the future father-in-law of Callahan Freight's incoming chief operating officer, it's becoming a bit of a liability, being photographed near someone dressed like hired help. Vanessa's face flushed red for half a second, and I actually thought she might say something. Instead, she just whispered, "Dad, please," and looked down at her plate. Nathan laughed it off entirely, waving his hand like his father-in-law had made an amusing little joke rather than humiliated me in front of a room full of strangers. I felt a slow, hot burn crawl up the back of my neck, but I forced my face into that same tired, humble smile I'd been wearing for 22 years. I wanted to see exactly how far this family was willing to go while they thought there was absolutely nothing standing behind me. If I had known just how far, I would have ended it that very night. The real damage was happening somewhere I couldn't see it directly, in the private moments between my son and the woman he was about to marry. Vanessa started calling me late at night, her voice shaking, though she never fully explained why. It was only after some gentle, patient questions that I learned Nathan had started controlling every dollar that came into their shared accounts, telling her that a future executive's household needed to run lean and disciplined right before he disappeared for another weekend golf trip with Reginald's business partners. He told her point blank that her interior design side business, the one thing that made her genuinely happy, made the household look unprofessional, and he pressured her to shut it down completely. Then came Nathan's 31st birthday. I'd spent an entire weekend in my garage restoring an old railroad conductor's lantern I'd found at an estate sale years earlier, the same kind his mother used to collect before she passed. I sanded it, rewired it, polished the brass until it practically glowed, thinking he might see his mother in it the way I did. When I handed it to him at his own birthday dinner, Nathan barely glanced at it before setting it down on the table like it was contaminated. "Dad, seriously," he said, loud enough for Vanessa's entire family to hear. "Vanessa got me a custom Rolex for my birthday. This looks like something you'd find at a swap meet behind a gas station. Maybe stick to gifts that fit the room next time." I felt something inside me go very still and very quiet. "Wealth was never about what sits in a bank account, Nathan," I told him calmly. "It's about the character you carry into a room. Right now, son, you're bankrupt in the one currency that actually matters." Nathan just rolled his eyes and muttered something about me always turning everything into some kind of sad little lecture, then went right back to showing off his new watch to Reginald's business associates like I hadn't spoken at all. The very next week, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my duplex by courier. It was a formal invitation to dinner at Chantel's, the single most exclusive French restaurant in the entire city, the kind of place where a bottle of water costs more than my weekly groceries. The invitation came from Nathan, Reginald, and Delphine. Vanessa's name was conspicuously absent. A small handwritten note attached to the card read, "We need to discuss the long-term optics of this family before the wedding announcement goes public." I knew immediately this wasn't a dinner. It was an ambush dressed up in linen napkins and candlelight. I spent the 2 days before that dinner doing something I hadn't done in years. I sat down with Walter Higgins in a quiet, windowless conference room and reviewed every single line of Nathan's recent expense reports as incoming COO. What I found chilled me. Nathan had been quietly funneling company funds meant for regional fleet maintenance into a private consulting retainer paid to a firm owned, entirely on paper, by none other than Reginald Whitfield. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't even subtle. My son was already laundering favors for his future in-laws before he'd even officially taken the COO title, betting that nobody would scrutinize the new Golden Boy's paperwork this early in the process. When the night of the dinner arrived, I put on my oldest navy jacket, the one with the small burn mark near the cuff from a coffee spill years ago, and I drove my truck straight up to the restaurant's valet stand like I had every right to be there. The young valet eyed the truck like it might be contagious, but I pressed a 20 into his palm and walked through those heavy oak doors with my shoulders square. As I was led to the private back room, I could see Nathan, Reginald, and Delphine already seated like they were holding court. The second they spotted me, the polite smiles they'd been practicing evaporated, replaced by cold, tight-lipped stares. Through the appetizer course, it was an absolute clinic in condescension. Reginald talked at length about his family's 3 generations of yacht club memberships. Delphine made pointed little remarks about how certain people in society simply never develop any real drive. Nathan sat there the entire time, swirling wine he definitely couldn't have afforded 18 months earlier, and never once opened his mouth to defend me. We are approaching the exact moment this entire story turns on its head. If you want to watch precisely how one overconfident young executive's entire world can collapse inside of a single phone call, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss a single second of what happens next. Then the entrees arrived, and the real reason for that dinner finally revealed itself. Nathan set down his fork, cleared his throat, and the temperature of the entire room seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant. Was this really happening? Was my own son actually about to do what I suspected he'd been planning for weeks? Nathan adjusted the cufflinks on his new French cuff shirt, letting the candlelight catch them just right. "Dad," he began, his voice syrupy with practiced patience, "let's not dance around this. Vanessa is about to become the wife of a chief operating officer. Frankly, your whole image has become an embarrassment to where this family is headed." I kept my face perfectly still. "An embarrassment," I repeated evenly. "How exactly does that work, son?" Reginald jumped in immediately, tapping 2 fingers sharply against the white tablecloth. "Look at yourself, Frank. You walk into a place like Chantel's dressed like you're here to fix the plumbing. Nathan is about to run one of the largest logistics operations on the eastern seaboard. He is going to be photographed with senators, with CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, with people who matter. We simply cannot have a father-in-law who looks like he wandered in off a construction site." That's when Delphine reached into her quilted designer handbag and produced a thick manila envelope, sliding it slowly and deliberately across the white linen tablecloth until it came to rest beside my water glass. "There's $15,000 in cash inside," she said, her voice dropping to something sharp and clinical. "Take it. Find yourself a nice little place a few states away, and let Nathan build the life he's earned, without this particular complication following him around. We won't have some sentimental old man with a broken compass fixation dragging down everything this family is about to become." I looked down at that envelope for a long moment. Then I lifted my eyes and looked directly at my son, my own boy, the same boy I had quietly, secretly lifted, rung by, rung up, a corporate ladder he had no idea I owned, sat there, nodding along with every single word his future in-laws were saying. "You actually want me gone, Nathan?" I asked quietly. "After everything? After every sacrifice his mother and I made so you could have options we never had?" Nathan actually had the nerve to smile. "It's just business, Dad," he said, leaning back in his chair with a confidence I hadn't earned him the right to feel. "You've had a good run, pretending things were simple. Time to accept where you actually fit in this picture. Take the money. Move on." That was the line. 22 years of careful, quiet patience ended in that exact heartbeat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a fist on the table. Instead, a slow, calm smile spread across my face, the kind of smile that made all three of them shift uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. "You think $15,000 is real money, Delphine?" I asked, and something in my tone had changed entirely, dropping the tired, humble register I'd worn like a costume for over 2 decades. "You think an envelope like this gives you the authority to erase a man's family?" Nathan let out a nervous little laugh, though I noticed his hand tighten around his wine glass. "Don't make this dramatic, Dad. Just take the deal. You genuinely don't have any leverage here. I'm about to run one of the biggest logistics companies on this entire coast. I hold every single card at this table." "You don't hold a single card at this table, son," I said softly, reaching into my jacket pocket. "You're a guest inside a house you were never handed the deed to." I pulled out my phone, set it face up in the center of the white tablecloth, and turned the volume all the way up before any of them could react. Nathan scoffed, glancing at Reginald and Delphine with obvious confusion. Who is he even calling? A cab? Security? "Dad, don't make a scene." I ignored him completely and pressed dial. I knew exactly whose line I was reaching. A private, encrypted number that bypassed every assistant, every secretary, every layer of corporate bureaucracy at Callahan Freight and Logistics Headquarters. It didn't even complete a full ring before a calm, sharp voice answered. "Sir, is everything all right?" The voice rang out clearly across the entire quiet dining room through the phone's speaker. Nathan froze completely, his whole body suddenly rigid in his chair. He knew that voice, instantly. It belonged to Walter Higgins, the public chairman of Callahan Freight, the man Nathan had sat across from in a dozen executive meetings, believing him to hold the highest authority in the entire company. "Walter," I said calmly, leaning back and folding my arms, "I'm having dinner with our incoming chief operating officer, and I've just reached a very clear decision about his future with this organization." Nathan's jaw actually dropped open. He stared at the phone like it had grown teeth, then looked back up at me, the color draining slowly from his face. "Sir, is there a concern regarding Mr. Delacroix's readiness for the position?" Walter asked over the speaker, his voice deadly steady. "Before I say another word, I need to know how many of you watching are actually riding along with me tonight. If you believe this young man is about to learn a lesson he will never, ever forget, type the word terminated in the comments section right now." "Walter," I continued, my voice carrying through that private dining room with a weight none of them had ever heard from me before, "revoke Nathan Delacroix's incoming appointment as Chief Operating Officer, effective the moment this call ends. Freeze every equity option tied to his name, pending a full forensic audit of the consulting payments routed through Whitfield Advisory Group over the past 8 months. Have his executive access terminated by end of business tomorrow." You could have heard a pin drop in that private room. Delphine's mouth hung open. Reginald sputtered, "What in God's name kind of joke is this supposed to be? Nathan, who exactly is this senile old man talking to?" But Nathan couldn't answer. He was staring at that phone like it belonged to a stranger wearing his father's face. He understood, in that exact instant, that Walter Higgins answered to exactly one person on this entire earth, a silent founder who still held 100% of the voting shares in the company. Nathan thought he was about to run. Over the speaker, Walter didn't hesitate for even half a second. "Understood, sir. I'll have the termination paperwork drawn up tonight, and the audit team briefed by 7 a.m. Will there be anything further?" "That will be all, Walter." "Thank you," I said, and calmly tapped the screen to end the call, sliding the phone back into my jacket pocket like I'd just ordered a cup of coffee. Nathan was trembling now, his knuckles white against the edge of the table. What is this?" he stammered, all of that polished confidence completely gone from his voice. "Dad, how do you know Walter Higgins? What did you just do?" I rose slowly from my chair, and for the first time in over 2 decades, I let myself stand like exactly who I really was. I didn't look like a tired old man in a coffee-stained jacket anymore. "This isn't a joke, son," I said, looking down at him with something that felt more like grief than anger. "You wanted to know how your new high-society family would treat a poor man. Now you get to find out exactly how the real owner of your company treats a thief. You're finished, Nathan." Reginald shot up out of his seat, trying desperately to reclaim some authority in the room. "Do you have any idea who we are? You cannot simply pretend to fire my future son-in-law. He's about to be chief operating officer of a $2 billion company." I turned my gaze on him slowly. "Your future son-in-law was about to become chief operating officer of my company, Mr. Whitfield, a company I built from one broken-down delivery truck before either of your children were even born. I promoted him because I hoped he'd grown into a man who understood what real responsibility looked like. Instead, you and your daughter's family taught him that dignity is something you can price out at $15,000. That lesson is about to cost him everything." Delphine looked like she might genuinely faint, her eyes locked on that thick manila envelope still sitting beside my water glass. I reached down, picked it up, and dropped it directly into Nathan's lap. "Keep every dollar of it," I told him. "You're going to need it for a very good lawyer once my audit team finishes tracing every payment that ever passed through Whitfield Advisory Group. Enjoy the rest of your dinner." As I walked out of that private room, I could hear Reginald shouting questions at Nathan, demanding answers my son clearly didn't have, while Nathan frantically tried redialing a number that would never pick up for him again. The valet handed me back the keys to my old truck, and as I pulled away from that restaurant into the cool night air, the familiar rattle under the hood didn't bother me one bit. For the first time in years, it sounded exactly like relief, but the story doesn't end in that parking lot. The full weight of what my son had done came crashing down the very next afternoon, and it arrived with a twist I genuinely never saw coming. When I got back to my duplex the next morning, after barely sleeping, Vanessa was already sitting on my front step, waiting. She wasn't crying. She looked calm, resolute, almost relieved, holding a slim leather folder against her chest. It turned out Vanessa had suspected for months that something was deeply wrong, not just with Nathan's spending, but with who he was becoming under the weight of her own parents' expectations. She had quietly consulted a divorce attorney 2 weeks earlier, and while doing so, she'd stumbled across strange recurring payments to something called Whitfield Advisory Group buried inside their joint financial statements. Rather than confront Nathan directly, she'd spent the last several weeks carefully photographing documents from his home office late at night, building a private paper trail she planned to hand over to whoever eventually needed it. She handed me that folder on my front step, and inside it was everything my own forensic team had found, and more. Evidence that Reginald Whitfield had been quietly siphoning money out of Callahan Freight through inflated consulting invoices for the better part of a year, with Nathan's full knowledge and cooperation. In exchange for the Whitfield family's blessing on the marriage and a guaranteed introduction into their social circle, my son hadn't just tolerated his in-laws' cruelty toward me. He had actively partnered with them to steal from the very company that had quietly built his entire career. Nathan didn't just lose a job title that week. He lost his engagement, his penthouse lease, which was tied to his now non-existent executive salary, and every single connection Reginald had promised him the moment the audit results became public record. Within 2 months, the forensic investigation confirmed Reginald and Nathan together had misappropriated just under $600,000 in company funds. Facing the very real possibility of federal charges, Reginald Whitfield's supposedly loyal old money family distanced themselves from Nathan almost overnight, refusing to spend a single dollar of their own fortune on legal fees for a scandal that threatened their carefully curated reputation. As for Vanessa, she and I still have dinner together most Sunday nights, and she tells me now that watching how easily her own parents discarded people for money is exactly what finally opened her eyes to who they really were all along. My son believed a broken compass and an old work jacket told him everything he needed to know about a man's worth. He learned, in the hardest way a person can learn anything, that real power never needs to announce itself, humiliate a stranger at dinner, or hide behind somebody else's last name to prove it's real. Karma always finds the exact scale it needs to balance the account, and arrogance, in the end, always costs far more than anyone thinks they can afford to pay. If watching justice finally catch up to a spoiled, entitled son meant something to you tonight, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss the next true family story right here on this channel. I'll see you in the next one.